My name is Ayla. I wasn't born into wealth. In fact, my earliest memories are of counting coins in my mother's palm, hoping we'd have enough to buy bread for the evening. Life had always been a little harder for us, a little crueler perhaps, but my mother used to say, "Ayla, the hardest days birth the strongest souls." I believed her. I had to. It was a gray morning when it all began. The rain tapped gently on the hospital windows like a persistent visitor, refusing to be ignored. Inside the emergency ward, the air smelled of antiseptic and quiet prayers, the usual symphony of a place where life and death danced in uncertain rhythm. I was on a double shift. The pay wasn't much, but every extra hour I worked meant a little more medicine for my mother's heart condition. She was my world, my only family, and I promised myself I'd never let poverty decide her fate. That morning, the hospital was busier than usual. A terrible accident had taken place on the outskirts of the city. People were rushed in, some conscious, many not. The nurses ran from one bed to another. The doctors gave hurried instructions, and amidst all the chaos, a man was wheeled in, unconscious, his face pale as snow. I remember the moment I saw him. Not because he looked different, but because something about him felt heavy, like the world rested on his shoulders even as he lay there lifeless. He was young, probably early 30s, his skin smooth, his features sharp, though now streaked with blood and bruises. The head nurse barked an order. "Ayla, we need AB negative immediately. The blood bank's dry." My heart sank. AB negative was rare. I knew because I had it. Without thinking twice, I spoke. "I'm AB negative." The nurse hesitated. "You've already been on for 20 hours. "Does it matter?" I shot back. And so, within minutes, I was seated beside the unconscious man, a needle in my arm, blood flowing from my veins into his. As I sat there, watching the red stream connect us, something strange stirred inside me. A connection I couldn't explain. His eyes fluttered open for the briefest second, and though he couldn't speak, his gaze met mine. I don't know if it was a hallucination on his part, or exhaustion on mine, but in that fleeting moment, I felt as though the universe paused. His eyes, they weren't ordinary. They carried stories, scars, and secrets. I smiled weakly. "You'll be okay." Of course, he didn't reply. After what felt like an eternity, the blood transfusion was complete. The doctors stabilized him, and he was taken to ICU. I wanted to ask his name, his story, why he looked like a man who had lost everything and yet still held on to something invisible. But no one knew. He had no ID, no phone, no wallet. Just a silver bracelet with the name Zeeb Malik engraved on it. I left my shift that night exhausted, my body aching, but my heart oddly light. I didn't know that man, but something about helping him felt important. The days that followed, I returned. The next day, and the next. Z Malik, as the file called him, remained unconscious. No family came, no friends inquired. The hospital tried to trace him, but it was as though he didn't exist. Each day, I'd sit by his bed for a few minutes, talk to him about my mother, about life, about silly things that made me laugh, hoping somewhere his soul could hear mine. The other nurses teased me. "Falling for a sleeping prince, Ayla?" I'd laugh it off, but inside I felt protective of him, a stranger who had somehow found a place in my heart. Until one night, everything changed. The awakening, it was past midnight when he finally opened his eyes. I was on night duty, reading a worn-out romance novel. The machines beeped, and I glanced up to find those same piercing eyes staring at me. Startled, I dropped my book. "You're awake," I whispered. His voice was raspy, barely a whisper. "Who are you?" "Ayla," I smiled, brushing a stray hair behind my ear. "Your nurse." He looked around, confusion knitting his brows. Where? St. Mercy Hospital. You were in an accident. His gaze held mine for a moment longer. Then, without warning, tears welled up in his eyes. I didn't ask why. Sometimes the heart breaks in silence. I reached for his hand. You're safe. Now. He closed his eyes, a single tear trailing down his bruised cheek. In that moment, neither of us knew that our fates had just intertwined in ways neither of us could imagine. I didn't sleep that night. After he woke up, I should have felt relief. A stranger opening his eyes, clinging to life, is something nurses live for. But with him, it was different. His presence lingered in my mind long after I left his room. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, pale, bruised, yet heartbreakingly beautiful, with eyes that carried the weight of 1,000 storms. I remember calling my mother after my shift. Ami, wo mareez hoosh mein aa gaya hai. Allah ka shukar hai, beta, she whispered, her voice weak from illness. Koi apna nahi aaya ab tak uske paas? Nahi. Koi bhi nahi. And that was the part that gnawed at me. In a city like ours, even the loneliest people have someone, a distant cousin, an old friend, a neighbor who remembers them. But this man, nothing. No family, no visitors, no police case, no name other than a faded engraving on his bracelet. Zid, Malik, the mystery. Deepens. When I returned to the hospital the next morning, my steps automatically led me to his room. The blinds were half closed, letting in slits of golden sunlight that danced across his face. He was awake. His head rested against the pillow, a faraway look in his eyes, as if searching through memories that refused to return. I hesitated at the door before entering. Good. Morning, I greeted softly. He turned his head, offering a faint smile. It wasn't much, but for a man who looked like he carried the world's burdens, it felt like sunshine. Feeling better? I don't know, he admitted, his voice raw, unfamiliar. I crossed the room, adjusting his IV drip. Do you remember anything yet? Your name? Where you're from? He closed his eyes, his jaw tightening. Nothing. Just fragments. A woman's voice. Laughter. A car. Then darkness. I wanted to comfort him, but word felt so small. So instead, I did what I always did. I sat beside him and talked about the world, the patients, my crazy old neighbor, my mother's obsession with morning radio shows. Anything to pull him out of that pit. And every now and then, I'd catch him staring, not in a way that made me uncomfortable, but like a man who was slowly finding pieces of himself in the stories of someone else. Whispers in the corridor. The hospital staff had begun whispering. Who is this guy? Did you see that watch? Even broken, it's worth thousands. He has to be someone important, but no one knew. Even the police couldn't trace him. The car he was found in was registered under a fake name, no fingerprints, on record. It was like he was a ghost in a world full of people. But to me, he was real. His pain was real. His loneliness was real. And for reasons I couldn't explain, I felt drawn to it. The breakthrough days passed. He healed, physically at least. I brought him books, magazines, even made him listen to my favorite old songs, and somewhere between those moments, a bond formed. Not romantic, not yet, but something deeper, something raw. One evening, as I sat by his bed, sipping cheap hospital coffee, he spoke. Ayla, I think I remember something. I set the cup down, my heart skipping. I remember a name. Zayan. My breath caught. Is that your name? He nodded, eyes wide like a lost child finding his way home. Zayan Malik, he repeated softly. Goosebumps trailed my arms. You should tell the doctors, the police. No, he cut me off, fear flashing in his gaze. No one can know. Not yet. Why? He hesitated, then whispered, "Because if they find me, they'll kill me." Secrets and shadows. I stared at him. 1,000 questions bubbling inside. Who was after him? What had he done? But instinct told me not to push. I placed my hand over his. "You're safe here, I promise." And for the first time since he opened his eyes, he let his guard down. That night, when I returned home, I couldn't shake his words. They'll kill me. Who was they? And how could a man like him, broken, lost, yet so strangely commanding, be running from something darker than death itself? A night of rain. A week later, a storm hit the city. Power flickered. Roads flooded. The hospital ran on backup generators. I was on another night shift. Zayan's room was quiet, save for the soft hum of machines. I found him sitting by the window, staring at the rain. "You should be resting," I said. He looked at me, a strange glint in his eyes. "Have you ever felt," he murmured, "like you're meant for something bigger, but life just keeps pulling you down?" His words hit home. I nodded. Every day. He smiled, the kind of smile that held too many untold stories. I wasn't always like this, Ayla. There was a time when I owned this city, when my name meant something. I built companies, made deals, made enemies. I swallowed. "Who are you, Zayan?" He turned away, voice barely a whisper. A man who trusted the wrong people, who built empires on loyalty, and watched them burn. The storm raged outside, but in that room, silence screamed. That night, I realized this wasn't just a patient. This was a man whose story could change mine forever. I remember the first time I saw fear in Zayan's eyes. It wasn't the kind of fear you see in patients waking from trauma. No, his was different. A cold, silent terror, like a man who's looked death in the face too many times and survived. Just enough to know it would come again. For days I watched him wrestle with his thoughts. At night, when he thought no one was watching, he'd stare at the ceiling, lost in a storm only he could see. I started to notice the smallest things, how he flinched at certain sounds, how his fingers trembled whenever the phone at the nurse's station rang, how he always asked if the hospital doors were locked. There was more to him than a lost memory. And one evening, as the sky bled into shades of crimson and the world outside the hospital turned to quiet gold, he finally told me his truth. The truth unfolds. "You ever wonder why no one came for me, Ayla?" His voice was soft, yet heavy like a confession. I looked up from the chart in my hands. "I assumed your family was somewhere far." He chuckled bitterly. "I have no family left, and the ones I called friends, they're the ones who tried to bury me." I froze. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes as if peeling back layers of wounds he'd buried too long. "I built everything, Ayla. From nothing. I was 19 when I left home, 21 when I made my first million. By 30, I had a chain of businesses, tech firms, a real estate empire, even stakes in overseas markets. I stared, unable to imagine the man before me, weak, bruised, hunted as the titan he spoke of. People loved me, he went on, or at least what I gave them. But power isn't loyalty, Ayla. It's a leash, and the moment you slip, they tighten it. His eyes met mine and I saw it, the ache, the regret, the fury of betrayal. A year ago, I trusted the wrong men, business partners. They siphoned funds, staged deals, set me up for crimes I never committed. By the time I caught it, it was too late. I swallowed hard. But why try to kill you? He looked away, a humorless smile ghosting his lips. Because dead men don't talk, Ayla, and a corpse can't reclaim what they stole. The room felt heavier, the air thicker. I realized then, this wasn't just a billionaire betrayed. This was a king stripped of his crown left for dead by his own court. The weight of empathy. I sat beside him, placing my hand over his. You survived, Zayan. That means something. He laughed, a low, rough sound. I survived because of you. You gave me blood when everyone else was ready to let me die. It wasn't flattery. It was truth. And for the first time since I met him, I felt the invisible thread between us tighten, not as nurse and patient, but as two broken people clinging to each other in a world too cruel to care. I don't know what's next, he admitted. They probably think I'm dead, and if I surface, they'll try again. Then don't surface until you're ready, I whispered. Why would you even care, Ayla? You don't owe me anything. I smiled softly, brushing my thumb across the back of his hand. Because I know what it's like to be powerless, to watch the world pass you by while you fight battles no one else sees. And because sometimes strangers save each other when no one else will. His eyes softened, a flicker of warmth in there. Storm, an unspoken bond. After that night, things changed. Zayan wasn't just a patient anymore. He became a friend, a confidant. The one person in that sterile, cold hospital who listened when I spoke about my mother's health, my fears, my regrets about not becoming a doctor, about nights I'd cry myself to sleep wondering if life would ever be kind. He told me about cities he'd built from scratch, deals signed on penthouse rooftops, the feeling of watching skyscrapers touch clouds because of his signature. And yet, he confessed, none of it ever filled the void. Money buys distraction, not peace, he said one evening, as we watched the rain blur city lights. I nodded, understanding more than he knew. I used to think if I made enough, I whispered, I could save my mother, buy a better life, escape the filth of poverty. But I'm still here. Same stained walls, same rusted gates, same unpaid bills. He looked at me, something unreadable in his gaze. Not for long, he promised. The start of a new war, B. The time his injuries healed enough for him to leave, a plan had already begun to form in Zayan's mind. He couldn't reclaim his name. Not yet, but he could start over, from the shadows, quietly, carefully. I have contacts, people who owe me, people I can trust, he explained. I just need a little time. And then, without warning, he turned to me. I want you with me, Ayla. My heart stuttered. Me? I'm a nurse, Zayan. I don't belong in your world. You belong wherever you decide to stand. And you saved a dead man. I don't forget debts like that. I didn't know what to say. Half of me wanted to run, to stay in my quiet, miserable, predictable life. The other half, the wild, foolish half, burned to see what life could be beyond those hospital walls. And in Zayan's stormy eyes, I saw a future I never thought existed for people like me. The night he left, 2 weeks later, Zayan vanished. No goodbyes, no notes, just an empty hospital bed and a missing file from the nurse's station. I should have been heartbroken. But I wasn't. Because on my locker, I found a single silver bracelet. The one that read, Zid Malik, and a small card. Wait for me, Ayla. This isn't goodbye. It's the start of everything we talked about. I'll come back for you. Zayan. I closed my eyes, the bracelet cold in my palm, 1,000 emotions roaring through me. And I knew, deep down, this wasn't the end. This was our beginning. It's strange how a single person can walk into your life, turn it upside down, and then disappear, leaving behind a hollow so deep it echoes with every heartbeat. After Zayan vanished from the hospital, everything around me felt quieter. Still clocked in at 7 a.m., did my rounds, smiled for patients, and laughed at the same old jokes from the janitor. But something inside me had changed. It felt like a part of me had gone missing, the part that believed miracles didn't happen for people like me, because Zayan had been one, and now he was gone. The bracelet, I kept his bracelet with me always. It never left my wrist, not even when the hospital administration raised eyebrows. "It's a personal belonging of a patient," the head nurse scolded. "Then he should have stayed to claim it," I shot back. Because deep down, I believed he would. Every night before sleeping, I'd run my fingers over the faded engraving, Z. Malik. It felt like a promise. And maybe a debt he hadn't forgotten. Letters. Without a sender, weeks turned into months. Life dragged on. My mother's condition worsened. The medicines she needed were too expensive for my salary, and the hospital management denied my loan requests, one after another. I found myself staring out the same window Zayan once did, watching the rain fall against glass and wondering if he'd made it. If he was safe. If he'd ever meant those words. "Wait for me, Ayla." But then, something strange began happening. Small things at first. A new medicine package on my doorstep. No sender. Fully paid. A letter slipped under my apartment door. "You are stronger than you think." Anonymously cleared hospital bills. And late one evening, as I returned from work exhausted, a cab driver stopped outside my gate, holding an envelope with my name on it. Inside was a note. "You kept me alive. Now it's my turn. Keep believing." Z, I knew it was him. The return of the ghost. The city's underbelly whispered rumors. A nameless figure was reclaiming old territories, buying back assets through shell companies, outbidding corrupt magnates, turning old enemies' allies against them. No one knew his face. No one dared speak his name, but the tycoons who had once betrayed a billionaire now lived in fear, and in a corner of my heart, I knew it was Zayan. He was back, from the shadows, and this time, he wasn't alone. The proposal, it happened on a stormy night. How else could it have happened? I was walking home from a late shift. The streets were empty, neon signs flickering against puddles. I pulled my shawl tighter against the rain, my heart heavy with exhaustion. Then, a sleek black car slowed beside me. A window rolled down, and there he was. Zayan, alive, different, hardened, scar across his cheek, eyes darker than the last time, but still carrying that storm I remembered. "Get in," he said softly. I should have hesitated. I didn't. I slid into the seat, my hands trembling. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The rain filled the silence. Then he reached into his coat, pulling out a small velvet box. "Ayla, I made a promise." I stared, confused, as he opened it. Inside wasn't a ring, but a single gold key. "This isn't a marriage proposal," he explained, his voice low. "It's a life proposal. A seat at my table. A stake in my empire. A new world where you'll never be helpless again." Tears blurred my vision. "I don't belong in your world, Zayan." He leaned closer, his gaze fierce. "You belong wherever you choose to stand. And you saved a king when the world left him for dead. You deserve to rule alongside him. Anew." Beginning that night, I took the key. Not because of the wealth it unlocked or the power it promised, but because for the first time in my life, someone saw more in me than just a poor nurse fighting losing battles. He saw a partner, an equal, a survivor. And as the car drove into the night, leaving behind broken roads and forgotten addresses, I realized my old life was over. Ahead lay a war we'd fight together. And no matter how dark the night, I knew now, miracles weren't rare. Sometimes they came in the form of strangers, and sometimes they came back. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd be sitting in a boardroom surrounded by men in custom suits, speaking of millions like pocket change, I would have laughed. But here I was, not as a nurse, not as a bystander, as a partner. The war room Zayan's office wasn't like any I'd ever seen. It wasn't one of those glass towers scraping the sky. No. He operated from the shadows, an old textile mill on the city's outskirts, transformed into a fortress. A long mahogany table stretched. Across the room, huge monitors displayed live feeds, financial charts, property takeovers, and the slow crumble of the men who once tried to bury him. "This isn't revenge," Zayan said, his eyes scanning the screens. "This is reclamation." I sat beside him, a notebook in hand, though I knew by now my worth wasn't in notes. It was in instinct, in loyalty, in knowing when to strike. "Ayla, you've seen what kindness is worth in this world," he murmured. "Now let's see what your fire can buy you." And I did. The first strike, our first move, wasn't a hostile takeover or a scandalous leak. It was simple. A tiny, failing pharmaceutical company. The same one supplying overpriced medication to hospitals like mine. The same one that bled families dry while executives vacationed on yachts. Zayan bought it anonymously. We fired the board, slashed medicine prices by 60%, delivered free drugs to public hospitals, and watched as city papers buzzed about a mystery benefactor. But it was more than charity. It was strategy. When you win the people, Zayan said, you make enemies desperate. Desperation makes them sloppy. He was right. Within a month, his old betrayers started scrambling. Properties listed for urgent sale. Offshore accounts moved. Fear crackled through their circles like wildfire, and we weren't done. Ayla 2.0 wasn't the same girl who once counted coins for bus fare. Zayan made sure of that. He trained me, not in boardrooms but on rooftops at midnight in abandoned warehouses, in rooms where deals were made in whispers. I learned negotiation, risk analysis, and how to read a man's fear in his handshake. "Your greatest weapon isn't your charm, Ayla," he said once. "It's your history. No one fights harder than someone with nothing left to lose." And he was right. I began closing deals under aliases, buying out firms, reclaiming land, securing medical supply chains for free public hospitals. Every contract signed felt like stitching a new piece onto the broken tapestry of my old life. The Kabaisi ghosts strike back, but power is never reclaimed quietly. One evening, as we reviewed our next move, one of Zayan's trusted men stormed in. "Sir, they found you." I felt my stomach drop. "Who?" Zayan's voice was like ice. "Rauf Khan. He knows you're alive, and he's coming." Rauf Khan, the kingpin behind Zayan's betrayal. A man whose empire was built on blood, betrayal, and buried secrets. I could see Zayan's jaw tighten, but his eyes gleamed, not with fear, but hunger. "Good," he whispered. "Let them come." The final gambit. That night we met on a rooftop. Zayan, me, and his old lawyer, the only man left from his past who hadn't betrayed him. "We don't just beat them," Zayan said, tracing his finger over a city map. "We erase them." The plan was ruthless. Expose every illegal property Rauf held, leak financial documents to the media, have authorities seize offshore accounts, and the Yas' final move, a public bid for his flagship company, ensuring his legacy bore Zayan's name. "And you, Ayla," he turned to me, "you'll place the final bid." My heart pounded. Me. You're the face they never saw coming, the storm their arrogance ignored, and I understood. It wasn't just revenge. It was justice. For every nurse, unpaid, every patient lost, every daughter like me who cried behind hospital curtains. I wasn't a pawn anymore. I was a queen on the board. The night before that night, sleep evaded me. I stood by my window, the bracelet glinting in city lights. 1,000 memories rushed through. My mother's hospital bed, counting coins, my tiny rented room, and Zayan's voice, calling me into a world I never believed existed for girls like me. A single tear slid down my cheek. Not of fear, of resolve. "Tomorrow," I whispered, "I become what they never let me be." And in the distance I knew Zayan was watching the same sky. The boardroom was silent, not the kind of silence that comes from calm, the kind that simmers with unspoken fear. Across the table sat Ralph Kahn, the man whose name once sent shivers through city streets. The man who'd built empires on broken promises and buried bodies. And now, he looked like a relic of a war he'd already lost. Zayan wasn't there, by design. Ayla Malik, representing M Holdings, final bidder, the auctioneer announced. Yes, Malik. Zayan had given me his name. Long before marriage, a legacy passed by blood and loyalty, not signatures. Ralph's bloodshot eyes locked on mine. Who the hell are you? He spat. I smiled, slow and deliberate. I'm the storm you forgot to fear, and raised my bid. The final bid one by one, the other. Bidders fell away. Corporate sharks who knew the tide had turned. The media outside was already buzzing with leaks. Authorities waiting to seize assets once ownership changed hands. Ralph Kahn clutched the table. You don't have the power for this, he growled. I don't need power, I replied. I have justice, and your sins. The gavel struck. Sold. To M Holdings. The room burst into whispers. I stood, sliding the final contract toward Ralph. His hand trembled as he read it. Everything, his company, his properties, his offshore accounts, legally transferred. He wasn't a king anymore. He was a ghost, Zayan's. Return. The sun was rising as I stepped outside, and there he was. Zayan leaned against the car, that same storm in his eyes, though today it carried peace. You did it, he said, voice rough. We did it. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a tiny box. My breath caught. Now this one, he smirked, is a proposal. I laughed, a sound I hadn't heard from myself in years. Inside the box wasn't a buy ring, but the same bracelet, only this time engraved with 2 letters. A.M. Ayla Malik, he whispered. My partner, in business, in war, in life. And for the first time, I felt like I wasn't surviving. I was living a new empire in the months that followed. The city changed, hospitals rebuilt, medicines made affordable, schools opened in forgotten neighborhoods, girls trained not just as nurses, but as doctors, CEOs, investors. I wasn't Ayla the nurse anymore. I was Ayla Malik, co-founder of one of the fastest growing healthcare and business empires in the country. And beside me stood Zayan, the man who'd risen from death, not for revenge, but to fix a world that tried to bury both of us. The final reflection. Sometimes at night, I stand by my window and look at the bracelet. I remember the blood-stained bed, the stormy night, the stranger whose life I saved with my own hands. Not knowing he'd save mine one day. Life isn't fair. It's brutal, cold, and unrelenting. But sometimes it gives you a second chance. And when it does, you take it. Not to prove the world wrong, but to prove yourself right. The end.